Okay, we are on Daf Tezayin Amud Aleph Agun Erev Shabbos. Being that it's Erev Shabbos, we're going to skip the review and go straight into the Gemara. So we left off on the top of Tezayin Amud Aleph, about 5 lines down. Gufa. Amr v'ami bar Tevumi. So this we saw this on Tezav Amud Beis. Bavloi Kalim, Shmatas, Pisula. He says they are puzzle for schach. Now, Beloi Kalim are not Makabal Tumah, but they come from something that was Makabal Tumah. So my Beloi Kalim, what are these worn out Kalim? Amr Abaya Matlanias, She'ein Behen Shalish al Shalish. They are Shmatas, Matlanias, are patches that are not 3 etzba'is by 3 etzba'is. Shalish could have either been Amais or etzba'is, not Tvachim, because it is in the feminine, shalish. Shleish tvachim, shalish, we're talking about something very small, so it's 3 etzbais by 3 etzbais, 3 by 3. That is the shear. So delay chazyan, they're not fit leilanian, they're too small. Even an ani wouldn't use such a small piece of material, and certainly not for ashirim to use as a patch. So these are things that are not Mekabel Tumah anymore, but they came from a regular kli, which is Makabel Tumah, and Rev Ami Shita is that since it came from a kli that was Makabel Tumah, it is going to be possible to use for schach. Meaning, even though we don't make a Gzeres Kalim onto a kli that's not Makabel Tumah because of other Kalim that are Makabel Tumah, but a kli that came from an item that came from something that itself was Makabel Tumah will be possible for schach. We actually have machlekes. We have a brisa that follows this as well. Machatzalas, if you have a mat, shel shiva v'shel gemi, that's made out of papyrus or reed grass. Shiyareha, if you have something that is remaining from it, even though it's less than the shear of the machatzalas itself, ein misachachin behen, you may not use it as schach. What is the shear of a machatzelas? The shear is, I think Rashi said 6 tfachim by 6 tfachim. Where was that? A mapitz, yeah. Mapitz, Rashi says, is shisha al shisha. So even though it's less than 6 tfachim by 6 tfachim, you still cannot use it. Again, we have a raya to Rav Ami, that's something that was makabel tumah and now is not, it would not be allowed to use. Machatzal lakanim. Now this is a mishnah that's we'll learn more about on, I think, on Chav Amid on Daf Chav. Machatzal hakanim. This is a brisa, but there's a mishnah that talks about mats. Machatzal lakanim, a mat made out of reeds. So gedayla, if it's large, mesachichin ben, you may use it. Ketana and mesachin, a small one you can't. Now, what were these machatzelas used for? They were made for like mattresses. They were made to sleep on. So katana means something that was a little larger than the size of a person, and therefore you'd be able to sleep on it. So those you can assume were made to sleep on, and therefore you can't use them for schach because since it was made for sleeping, so it becomes a mattress and it's a kli. If it's very large, then you can assume it was not made for that, and therefore for laying on, and therefore it would not be makabel tumah. Even the very large ones are makabel tumah, and therefore in mesachim ba. Again, that we will discuss more in depth on Yotasam Beis and Daf Chaf, and that is actually practically relevant to the mats you get for the mats you would use for schach. If you're going to use bamboo mats, so it depends on what it's made for. Would depend on whether it's makabel tumah or not. Okay, the next part of the mission was about a chitit begodish, is somebody who hollowed out a haystack, which we said the problem there is when you hollow it out, so the schach was always there. You didn't make the roof, and therefore it is tasa loy min asi. Amar Rav Huna lo yishanu ela she'ein sham chalal tefach b'meshach shiva. This is the only time it's going to be puzzle if there was no chalal, means a vacated an empty space, a hollow space of a tefach, b'meshach shiva, 7 tefachim long and wide. If you had an area that was a tefach high and 7 by 7, already there, and the haystack was on top of that, so then you already have an oil. You just don't have kosher walls. Oh, so then says Rav Huna, so then you already have an oil. So now, what am I missing? I'm missing walls. So that's like a case of where you had schach on a sukkah that was 7 tvachim high, and then you dug down another 3 tvachim. Why isn't that tastalim in asin? The answer is because the schach is kosher schach. The schach is an oil. You just don't have the schach is functioning as a schach, as a covering. And therefore it's considered tasa. You did this. The problem is that you don't have the right height. You don't have walls. You don't have mechitzas. So they're here. If I dig out the mechitzas, and then I'm left with I basically just if the bottom, think of your haystack as the bottom wasn't hitting the ground. So there's a tefach of area on the ground that it didn't hit the ground. So now really I have just very, very thick schach, and therefore as I pull away as I dig out the haystack, so then I'm just thinning out my schach, and then I'm going to be left with a schach over with mechitzas. Now that's the way the Gemara first stated Rav Huna. The Gemara has an alternative reading of Rav Huna, but before we do that, we have a brisa. We have a brisa like this as well. If you hollow out a haystack to make a sukkah, harez a sukkah. What? V'anantran ain't a sukkah. Our Mishnah says that it's not a good sukkah. Elalav. So what could be pshat in the stira in the Mishnah and the brisa? Shmamina Rav Huna must be Shmamina. One is talking about where there was already a chalal tavach, and our Mishnah is talking about where there was no chalal tavach. So others ask this not as a statement that Rav Huna made on our Mishnah, but rather it asks it as a stira. Our Mishnah says if you hollow out a haystack to make a sukkah, it's not a good sukkah. For Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, raise a sukkah, it is a good sukkah. Rav Huna came to answer this stira like Kasha. Depends how big. If you had an area there that was already an oil, the size of a sukkah, 7 by 7 and a tefach thick. So all I'm doing now is just extending that oil. Okay, next Mishnah. The Mishnah is going to talk about mechitzas now. We're talking about hanging mechitzas or floating mechitzas. Hamashal shel defines malmala lemata. If you hang a wall from top bottom, okay. So let's say you have a 10 tefach board. Let's say it's 10 tvachim by 7 tvachim. Okay, so it's the minimum size of a kosher wall for a sukkah, and you hang it from your schach. Let's say your schach is 20 tvachim off the ground, and you hang it from the schach. So that's mishalshal. You lower the defanes milmal lamata. Im gavay mina aretz shloisha tvachim. If there's a space of 3 tvachim, like the case I just gave, there's more than 3 tvachim from the ground. Pisula. That is not valid. That is not a valid wall. Rashi says that sheer 3 tvachim is that a gedi, a goat could just run right into your sukkah. That's not considered a mechitza. But if you started from the ground and you went up and you only got 10 tvachim high, because we'll say good asik, we'll just extend the wall further up to this chach, and that will be kosher. Rabbi Yosi says kashem shmal mata l'mala asar, just like from 10 tvachim is a mechitza if it was started on the ground, then 10 tvachim kach l'mala l'mata asar tvachim, 10 tvachim from above down to the bottom. Even if I have 3 tvachim that you can get in from the bottom, that is still kosher. And we're about to see, because Rashi, as Rashi says, the last Rashi on the Mishnah, about 4 lines up from before it gets wider, Rashi says the kasavar mechitza teluya asara materes. A hanging mechitza, as long as it's 10 tvachim, will be matir, and that brings us to our sugya. Says the Gemara, what is the machlekes in our Mishnah between the Tana Kama and Rabbi Yosi? Mar savar mechitza teluya materes. The Rabbi Yosi holds that a hanging mechitza that has more than 10, that's 10 tvachim in height, but is more than 3 tvachim away from the ground, that is materis. That is fine. That will be considered a mechitza. Umar Savar, that's the Tana Kama, says mechitza tuliya eina materis. Where do we find this machlekes? We find this machlekes when it comes to Shabbos as well. So again, Shabbos, you need mechitzas if you're putting up an eir, if you're making a Rosh Hashanah, if you're putting a mechitza between two properties, mechitza needs to have 10 tvachim, and needs to be 10 tvachim high. Now, can a mechitza materas work with the atluya? I'm sorry, if there's a mechitza teluya, if it doesn't hit the ground or it does not come within 3 tvachim of the ground, will that be okay? Well, the case the Mishnah is talking about is a scenario where you have a bar, you have a well between two chatzeros, and there is a fence going crossing the properties. Right? It's the boundary fence between the properties. The bar was sitting in between the two properties. Half was in one side, half of it was on the other side, and there was a mechitza that ran right across the center of the bar. So you have the bar has an opening on one side and on the other side. The Mishnah says you cannot draw water from that well on Shabbos. Why? Because when you're drawing water, you're taking water that's on your friend's side and bringing it into your side. And this is in a scenario where you don't have an eruv between the two, an eruv chatzeres joining the two chatzeres. So you're not allowed to draw water from that well, either one of them, because they're taking water that was in both of their rishuyas and putting it into one of theirs. So that wouldn't work. Says the Mishnah. Tanan Hasan, 4 lines from the bottom. Bar sheben shei chatzeres, a well between two chatzeres, between two courtyards. Ein memal memena b'Shabbos. You are not allowed to draw water from that well on Shabbos. Ela im kain asa la mechitza asar tvachim. Unless you made a mechitza 10 tvachim tall, bein mamala, bein mamata, either on the bottom of that well or on the top of that well, bein b'teich oignei, Rashi learns, as long as it's within the well. Okay, it's got to be within the rim of the well. Okay, that's what you're going to need. So you need a mechitza in the well. Now Rashi points out that everybody is matir when it comes to water. There is a heter of a mechitza teluya. By water, they were more mekel, Rashi says, and everybody allowed a mechitza teluya when it comes to water, as long as you did something specifically to get water from this well. But the Tanakam holds that the mechitza running right across the bar will not suffice, meaning that mechitza was not put up to draw water from the well. That was put up as a divider between your two properties. That mechitza will not work. That's considered a mechitza teluya because it does not go to the bottom of the bar. In the bar itself, when you put up a mechitza for the bar, there you could use a mechitza teluya, at least according to the first opinion. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says this is actually machlekes Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai Erim Milmala. Beis Shammai will say it's okay to use to make an additional mechitza in the bar, even if it doesn't go to the bottom. Beis Hillel Erim Milmata. Beis Hillel says no, it actually has to go from the bottom up. Taisus points out that in Erevin it has it as the opposite. Okay. That's the first two shitas. Amar Rabbi Yehuda comes along and says, "Laite mechitza gedelim and akaisa shebeneim." I have a mechitza going across the bar. Why do I need anything else? Clearly, Rabbi Yehuda holds mechitza teluya is mater, and the Chacham, the first shita, holds that it is not mater. Okay, so it says Amar Rabba Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, Rabbi Yehuda b'shitas Rabbi Yosi Amra. They seem to be saying the same thing. The Amar mechitza teluya materes. Rabbi Yosi said it when it came to sukkah, that if I have a sukkah that is not within 3 tvachim, if I have a wall of a sukkah that is not within 3 tvachim of the ground, but it's 10 tvachim high, that will be a good mechitza. And Rabbi Yehuda is saying that this wall running across my bar, this mechitza running across my bar in between our two properties, even though I didn't put it specifically up for the bar, it's just there, it's a mechitza teluya, and it works. Rabbi Bar Chana says, it sounds like they hold the same thing. It says, not so fast. Not true. Loi Rabbi Yehuda sarva like Rabbi Yosi. Rabbi Yehuda does not agree to Rabbi Yosi. V'lo Rabbi Yosi sarva like Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Yosi wouldn't agree to Rabbi Yehuda either. How so? Loi Rabbi Yehuda sarva like Rabbi Yosi. Rabbi Yosi wouldn't, even though he says mechitza teluya works for Shabbos, he won't necessarily say it's going to work when it comes to sukkah. Why is that? Because Ad kan like Rabbi Yehuda hasam. Rabbi Yehuda only said his halacha there when it came to Shabbos, El be'iruvi chatzeres derabanan, because that's a din derabana. Iruvi midiraisa, you're in Rosh Hashanah. Everybody can take water. Midirabanan, they said that, well, it looks like two different people owning the property, and therefore they require an erev chatzeres. And Rabbi Yehuda would say, okay, so you didn't make an erev chatzeres, and you have a mechitza teluya, that's good enough. But here you need a mechitza midiraisa, and therefore mechitza teluya will not work. Why? Okay, and Mar says an opposite svar for Rabbi Yossi. V'loi Rabbi Yossi served like Rabbi Yehuda. Ad kan like Rabbi Yossi hacha. Rabbi Yossi only said that a mechitza teluya works when it comes to sukkah, because sukkah is a mitzvah aseh. Well, Shabbos the iser skila, but Shabbos, which many its halachas can pertain to an iser skila, even though this particular halacha is only the rabbanon. But Shabbos has a chaymer of skila to it. Why I wouldn't say such a kula when it comes to Shabbos. Okay. There's a story where they were mater and mechitza teluya, and who were they semachan at that time? It wasn't Rabbi Yossi because he was already nifter. Rashi says, and Rabbi Yossi was the rav of it was the Rosh Hashiva in Sipari. Rabbi Yossi was the Rosh Hashiva in Sipari. And if you're telling me that Rabbi Yossi only said his halach when it came to Sukkah and not Shabbos, then I have a problem, because I know that there was a story and they used a mechitza teluya on Shabbos in Sipari. And if you're telling me Rabbi Yossi wasn't mater, then who was? So where it says, LLP Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. The heter was already after Rabbi Yossi was nifter. So he was no longer around. And his son Rabbi Yishmael disagreed with him, and he held that you could use a mechitza teluya on Shabbos. The Bach brings a raya from here that you're allowed to deviate or change from. There was a Mora the Asra in a town that held one way, and then a new Rav comes to town. You're after he was nifter, someone else came into his place. You don't have to follow his shitas. You're allowed to change. There's a raya. Rabbi Yishmael argued on his father. So what was the story? The Chiyasar of Dimi Amar, the Chiyasar of Dimi. Rav Dimi came, Amar, he said the following story. Pamachas shachachu v'lahiviu sefer Torah me'erev Shabbos. Could you imagine? Shabbos came, and they forgot to bring the sefer Torah to shul. Rashi says that they used to keep it, they wouldn't leave it in the shul because they were scared that the shul would be ransacked by the local goyim. Therefore, they wouldn't leave the sefer Torah in shul. But the problem is that they forgot it. They didn't bring it before, so I guess they would normally bring it before Shabbos, and they forgot to bring it. So now they were stuck. Now Rashi says the case was either where the shul was in a chutzner and they didn't make a erev chatzeres, or the shul was in a mavui and there were a few chatzeres opened up to that mavui and they didn't make a shutuf muvais. Okay. So what did they do? Lamachar on Shabbos, Pirsu Sadinan al Gabi Hamudim. They spread out sheets on poles to make mechitzas. They have used Sefer Torah, and they brought the Sefer Torah. Well, first of all, that doesn't make sense. Pirsu Sadin, Pirsu Mehechan Hevium. Where did they bring these Sadinim from? If you couldn't get the Sefer Torah into the Mavoi, so where did they get the Sadinim in the Mavoi? Ella rather, Matzu Sadinim Perusim al Gabi Hamudim. They found someone had set up sadin. Someone had set up sheets that were spread across poles, and basically what those sheets did is it cut off the other. Let's say the shul was in a mavui, and there were, let's say, 3 chatzeres opened up to this mavui. So these sheets were going from one entrance of one chatzer into the mavui straight. The sheets went across the mavoi and basically it made a mechitza and blocked off the other 2 entrances. So therefore, this was basically, there were no other chatzeres opened up to this mavoi. It was just this chatzer opened up to this to the shul. And you don't need a sheet of muvais in that case, because being that a Beis HaKnesses doesn't have people who live in them, so that it would not need to be part of a shituf. So they had the sheets that were set up. The point here, the point of this story is that the sheets were not hitting the ground. It was more than 3 tvachim away from the ground to the sheet. And Reb Shmuel was being makel in this instance, even though it was a mechitza teluya. So they have used Sefer Torah V'Karba, they brought the Sefer Torah and they read in it. So there you see, even though Rabbi Yossi, the Gemara wants to say, would not agree to be makel by Shabbos, Rabbi Shmuel was. Okay. Amar Rav Chizda, Amar Rav Avimi. Machatzalas arba umashu. If you have a mat that is 4 tfachim and a bit, or 2 mashahus, materes besukkah mishum doifen. You'd be able to use that for a sukkah. Heichi Ovid, what would you do? Talile be'emtza pachas mishlesh lamata pachas mishlesh lamala v'cha pachas mishlesh kalavadami. So here you have a situation where you have a sukkah that is 10 tefachim tall. Okay, so you got your 10 tefach, but you don't have a machitza. But I do have a mat that's 4 and a bit, 4 tefachim and 2 mashus. Okay, so what you can do is you hang that machitza up in the middle, and therefore it's less than 3 tvachim to the top and less than 3 tvachim from the bottom, and therefore you could say love it both ways, and you'll have a mechitza of 10. Says Gemara Pshita, that sounds pashut. Why not? You might say maybe the halacha of love it only works one way. You can't say love it. You can't stretch. How far can you stretch that mechitza? You can't say 2 love it's. You can say love it on both directions. Mesa effect the Gemara, we have a brayz that says machatzalas shiva umashu materes besukkah mishum doifen. If you have a mat that is 7 tfachim and a bit, that could be mater in a sukkah. That sounds like you can't say love it in 2 directions, only in one direction. Only once can you say love it. And therefore it has to be 7 in the mashu, and I can say love it either to the bottom or the top, but you can't say it twice. Says the Gemara, that brayso wasn't talking about a 10 tefach sukkah. That brayso was talking about a sukkah gedola. That could have been 10 amas, that sukkah. Umay kamashvan. And what's the chiddush of that brayso? The mishal shlon defanes milmala lemata kireb yasi. That you can be mishal shlon defanes, meaning I'm taking this 7.5 tefach, or the 7 and a mashu tefach mat. I'm putting it next to the schach, and now it's within 3 tefachim of the schach. So therefore, now I have a 10 tefach mechitza, and I'm going to say that that's going to be a kosher mechitza, like Rabbi Yossi, who says that a mechitza teluya will work. Now, Tosfos, if you take a look at the Tosfos Divrei Masel Kitanya Hi B'Sukkah Gedela, Tosfos brings a different girsa and didn't have this piece with Rabbi Yossi. It just said Kitanya Hi B'Sukkah Gedela. This is talking about a sukkah gedela. Let's read Tosfos, the third Tosfos from the bottom. Begoiva harbe, it was much taller. So I can't say love it twice on a mat that's 7 and a mashu. Hilkoch boy machatzalas shivu mashu. That's why the Brisa said we're talking about a mat that is 7 and a mashu. Uma'amida bepachas mishloisha samuch lekarka, and you're putting it 7 tfachim and a bit from the ground. Within, right? So then I'm able to say lavud, and I have a mechitza of asara, and the ritva fills in, and then I say good asik on the rest, and I good achas, and I extend the sukkah, the mechitza upward, and that explains the ritva. That would be the chiddush, that you could say lavud and then good. I can put those together. That would be the chiddush of the brisa. Right, so we have 2 girsais here in the Gemara. Either this brisa is only going according to Rabbi Yossi, and you're putting it from top and going to bottom, and maybe you wouldn't say you don't say love it and good. According to this other girsa in Tosfos, it's telling us a chiddush that you could say love it and good. Again, good means you extend something. I can say good asik to extend downward, or good achis. So here I'm saying love it. That's 7 tvachim and a mashu, and then it gets love it to the ground, and then it shoots upward up to the schach. Okay, one more Gemara. Amar Ba'ami, pas arba umashu. If I have a beam or a piece of wood that was 4 tvachim and a bit and a mashu, and Rashi says it's 10 tvachim tall. Matir b'sukkah mishum dofen. That you could be used as a wall. How? Put it within 3 tvachim of your wall. What's the chiddush? Shir meshach sukkah katana shifa. What he wanted to tell you with this was that we've been saying that the shir katana of a sukkah is the minimum size of a sukkah is roishe ruba v'shulchanei. Okay, well, how big is that roishe ruba v'shulchanei? So Rabbi Ami had a chab, how he taught us that in. He's telling us it's 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim. How does he say that halacha? By saying that if you have a pas, if you have a piece of wood that's 4 tvachim and a mashu, and I put that within 3 tvachim of the other wall, that will give me a wall. So you see that a wall only needs to be 7 tvachim. Have a wonderful Shabbos.